That's our good God. He turns the ugly things into beautiful things. And I guess that's the story of Easter. And I was reading this week, actually on social media, and I read this statement that caught my attention. And I just want to read it out, and then just as some thoughts. On Good Friday, we think about one thing: the crucifixion of Jesus. This is the epicenter of Christian faith. At the core of Christianity, we don't find perennial religion, meditation techniques, or a course in ethics, but a crucifixion. This is the enduring scandal of the gospel. The gospel is not motivational talks about happy marriages, being debt-free, and achieving your destiny. That all belongs to the broader world of proverbial wisdom, and it's fine as far as it goes. But it has little or nothing to do with the gospel. The gospel is about the cross, and the cross is a scandal. When the Apostle Paul told the Corinthians that he had determined to know nothing among them except Jesus Christ and Him crucified, he admitted that the cross was often viewed as a scandal and a folly. So be it. Any attempt to make Christianity less offensive and more palatable by de-emphasizing the cross is a betrayal of Jesus Christ Himself. So today, above all days, we look unflinchingly at Christ crucified. To enter deep into the mystery of the cross is to encounter the greatest revelation of who God is. For being disguised under the disfigurement of an ugly crucifixion and death, Christ upon the cross is paradoxically the clearest revelation of who God is. A couple of weeks ago, I read out of Philippians chapter 2, and I want to read those verses again. Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through to 8. It says there, "You must have the same attitude that Jesus Christ had. Though He was God, He did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, He gave up His divine privileges." The Greek words there is kenosis, which means He emptied Himself. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. And when He appeared in human form, He humbled Himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. And the next verse starts with a therefore. God exalted Him to the highest place and gave Him a name that's above every other name, that at that name every knee should bow, every tongue would confess. Everything on heaven and on earth would declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And I love the fact that Paul in that passage captures the essence of the character of God for us. He empties Himself and He dies. That's pretty scandalous that a God would characterize Himself like that. Because most of the other gods that you hear about, it's all about being the top dog, being the one who's in control, the one who's got all the power and all the authority and all of that. But this God that we love and we serve and we honor this weekend is a God who empties Himself and He dies. And He makes something incredibly ugly into something incredibly good and beautiful for us. And we stand here today with the news that He didn't just die and He didn't stay in a grave, but on the third day He rose again. And so I guess as I stand here today, I reflect on the fact that at Easter we celebrate an incredibly ugly event. It's ugly. There's nothing nice about the cross. You know, it's worn as an adornment, as jewelry and all of that. That's fantastic. But actually, the source of why it is esteemed today is because someone died on that cross and made something beautiful through it. And you know, that's true for each of us today. God has the miracle of Easter is that God is able to turn anything ugly into something beautiful. He can take our lives and He can transform them from something that is ugly and terrible and horrific and something that we're ashamed of, and He can turn it into something that we become proud of because of Him and what He's done for us. That's the good news, that there's nothing that you can have done, there's nowhere that you can have been, that the cross and the resurrection can't say, I'm the God of the impossible to transform what you think is ugly and death, and I can transform it into life. That's good news. And it's for all. I was reflecting, and it's amazing how as you come into Easter, you go back and, I do anyway, I read all of the gospel stories, and I love the bits and pieces in the story of that paint a picture of God, of Jesus, as being incredibly interested in the one. You know, He's hanging on a cross. And in Luke chapter 23, it catches this picture of Him being hung on a cross between two criminals. One of them gives Him a hard time, along with the crowd. He joins in with the jeering crowd and gives Him a hard time. And then the other one says this in Luke 23, he says to Jesus, he says, he actually says to his other mate who was giving him a hard time, he says, don't you fear God even when you have been sentenced to die? We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man hasn't done anything wrong. And then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And I'm not sure about you, but Jesus' response absolutely astounds me. You've got a guy hanging on a cross next to him. And all he says is to his mate, how dare you give him a hard time? He's innocent. We're not. And then he goes, Jesus, remember me. And Jesus' response is, today you'll be with me in paradise. He's interested in the one, but he makes a declaration because he knows that through his death and resurrection, that same thing is going to be true for everyone. That the option of paradise is open to all. It astounds me. When I read that, I go, oh, that was pretty simple, really. All the criminal had to do was, Jesus, remember me. It's an awesome God. What about this one? I love this particular one in the story. It's in Luke. It's a little bit earlier in the story, and it says this. Verse 32, 2 others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. They came to a place called the Skull. Straight away you go, well, they can make a movie out of that one. When they came to a place called the Skull. They nailed him to a cross. Maybe not so much a movie, although someone did do that. And the criminals were also crucified, one on his right and one on his left. And then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. And the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. How about this as a picture of God? Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. There is no sign of any of the human beings who are there. They're throwing dice for his clothes. They're jeering at him. They're enjoying the moment of these men being crucified. There's no sign of repentance. There's no sign of acknowledgement that this is the King of the Jews. This is Jesus. This is the Son of God who is dying there. And the response of Jesus to this is, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. It's both an individual thing. He sees the individuals around him, but he makes a declaration about the heart of God to all humanity. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. How grateful am I that I have a God who has extended forgiveness to me before I'm even aware that the forgiveness is there. That He's not a God who's waiting for me to respond to Him. He's already extended it to me through Jesus. And He said, I already forgive you. You see it in the story of the prodigal son, the loving father, when the son comes running back. The father runs out to meet him. The son's wanting to repent, but the father doesn't let him. He just says, get the coat, get the shoes, get the ring, let's have a party, because my son who was lost has been found. That's the God we serve. He gives us forgiveness. He gives us a hope for the future. And I really love this one. This is my favorite part, and one of my favorite parts, probably one of the favorite part of the story. And this is in John 19, verse 25, and it says this: standing near the cross were Jesus' mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus saw his mother standing there beside the disciple he loved, which is John, he's writing about himself, he said to her, dear woman, here is your son. And he said to this disciple, here is your mother. And from then on, his disciple took her into his home. Jesus is hanging on the cross. He's in absolute agony, and he notices his mum. Because he notices individuals. He notices you right where you're at right now. He notices what you're struggling with. He notices what is going on in your world. He sees his mum. And the response of his heart is, I don't want to leave my mum, because I'm the eldest. I'm responsible for my mum. In Jewish culture, he was the eldest. He was responsible for looking after his mum ever since his dad died. And he didn't leave that responsibility and leave his mum abandoned. He said to John, John, I want you to take over responsibility for my mum. And I look at that and I go, that's the heart of the God who died on a cross and rose again for us, is He has a solution for whatever issue that you're facing. He doesn't want you to remain stuck in the situation that you're in with no hope, with no future. He wants to speak into that and give a solution that gives you a future and a hope. Jeremiah 29, verse 11 says that the plan for God for us is that we would have a future and a hope. And that's the amazing thing about this story, is that Jesus, while He's suffering on the cross, on 3 occasions, ministers to the individual, but also to all. That those 3 statements, they can apply to each of us in our lives. Because the character of God is one who empties Himself and who dies so that we would have life. So we would experience all that He has for Him, that He has for us. And in the same way as that clip said, He brings goodness out of darkness. He brings light to our lives. And that's what we celebrate today as Easter Sunday. And so what we're going to do now is we've got communion here. We've got the Eucharist. We've got our celebration of Jesus' death, remembering his death. And one of the things why we take this is Jesus asked us to, because we remember his death, but it's more than that. As we do this morning, we remember that God can do the impossible. See, to everyone who observed Jesus dying that day, for him to come to life was an impossible thing. Because he died to the point where they stabbed his side and it was blood and water came out, which anyone who's medically, that generally signifies, that they've stabbed him in the heart. Therefore, he's not living anymore. To everyone who saw that, it was impossible for him to rise again. And yet on the third day, he did. To me, the message of what we celebrate around the table is there is nothing that I face in my life that God can't help me overcome. That he doesn't want to bring resurrection to. And so I'm asking and I'm declaring today that as we celebrate around this moment, we take a piece of bread and some juice, that whatever you're facing today, whatever it is that you need a breakthrough for, or whatever it is that you need God to do something of a miracle, where he brings resurrection, where he turns something ugly into something beautiful, whatever it is that you need from God today, let's reach out for that as we celebrate around these emblems this morning.